we can say definitively that religions are all bullshit.
Welcome to Brainstorm.
We have the explicit tag for a reason.
This is a base level argument to a higher level morality.
I get paid to science?
To science as much as one can science.
What the hell was my point?
Trigger warning. The Brainstorm podcast will criticize your most cherished beliefs. We attack nonsense in all its forms and discuss difficult subjects. If you peddle pseudoscience, supernatural woo, or religious dogma, then this is not your safe place. This is the home of hardcore skepticism.
To those listening live, or to our patrons, welcome back. For those listening weekly, welcome to the Shift to Reason Radio, the Brainstorm production that tries to educate and inform. We'll take current events and important skeptical topics and try to analyze them critically. Remember that we're live on Spreaker.com every second Friday, and today is August 18th, 2017. I'm Angela, and I'm joined by Corey, Renee, and Bassett, and Lisa, who is
out of the room now.
She's indisposed. And we're also joined by Ian Bushfield.
Hello, team.
Hello,
welcome
sir.
to the Brainstorm podcast.
It's great to be calling in from Vancouver. It seems to be a more reasonable hour here. I was thinking about the time
Yes.
change. I'm like, what time is it there?
It's 10:30 here.
Just shy of 10:30.
That's not too bad.
No, it's still it's past my bedtime, but that is fine. So you were involved in a study.
Yeah, it's funny because I got a master's in physics way back when and never published in a peer-reviewed journal during that time. But since then, I've now had 2 papers published, one in Journal of Secularism and Non-Religion that we could talk about a different time. But today we're going to talk about the time I was published in the British Medical Journal with Ben Goldacre, the famous skeptic, because apparently that can happen.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was relatively recent, right?
Yeah, so this paper only came out, or it was accepted on July 3rd and was published sort of in the last month. This is a paper that relates back to the time when I lived in London, England, and was working at a charity called Sense About Science. And one of the big campaigns of Sense About Science is called the All Trials campaign, and the goal of that is to see all clinical trials registered and their results reported. We have this issue where when companies, pharmaceutical companies, universities, other organizations take on clinical trials on the drugs that are under development, as many as half of those trials aren't being reported. Sometimes the results are boring, sometimes they don't show favorable results, and for all these different reasons, they sometimes just get left in the file drawer. And this distorts our view of whether or not the medicines we're taking work or not. So this is clearly important because if we want evidence-based medicine, we need all the evidence.
Right.
If you just sort of cherry pick the results, right, you get only a skewed view of what's working and what's not. So this campaign's been going for a number of years and had success in different areas about, changing government policies, putting a bit of pressure on pharmaceutical companies, getting a really big public campaign as well. Right now, there's over 90,000 people who've signed the petition at alltrials.net and over 730 organizations of all different shapes and sizes, from, little local humanist groups to the pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline. All over the place. What we wanted to do with this study is look at those pharmaceutical companies, sort of the biggest ones plus a smattering of smaller ones that we were able to pick out, and see what their policies actually were, because we'd come up with a sort of benchmark of what a good pharmaceutical company transparency policy would look like. It has to commit to register all of its trials, all the ones it's going to start, but also go back and register some of the older ones. It has to put summary results online. These are sort of the simple tabular results as soon as the study is done, so that researchers can see if it worked, and in a fairly standardized way, ideally, so that we can look at different studies and sort of do a simple comparison. And then two more sort of technical features, one called clinical study reports, which are very complicated documents that are prepared for regulators. And there's a big movement to make these publicly available because there's a lot of valuable information for researchers in there. And then a sort of way to share anonymized individual patient data with researchers who have valid research questions. And that one sort of goes in a box on its own because it's sort of a special, unique case. But it's really those first two, get trials registered, get results reported. So that's what we did. We went and looked, and that's really what my contribution to this study was Googling every pharmaceutical company's website, copy pasting their pharmaceutical or their policies onto our website, downloading them, saving them, and doing this for 50. So sometimes it was very easy. A lot of companies are really upfront, which is great. You can find it, where you'd expect on their website. Other companies, you do a bit of sleuthing on Google, you find it buried somewhere else. A couple others have it in like a mixture of places with press releases and other things. And a bunch of other companies just say nothing. And those are sort of the problematic ones. So we go through all of these different policy documents and we see there's all these different results, and it's this massive pile of work. So between the big team, they start to compile a scorecard essentially and had set out in advance what we're looking for. So we'd set our gold standard and then we started ranking. Do companies meet these criteria?
Okay.
And to be fair to the companies, after we'd sort of done this initial round, we went back to them and said, here's what we found out about your public policy, and here's what we think that score is as right now. Do you have any other public documents, or did we misunderstand something on your website? Because we really wanted to focus on the public policies. If they're doing something internal, that's great, maybe, but doesn't necessarily help the transparency part of it. So I also spent a lot of time emailing individual companies, trying to find emails for companies. Sometimes it was very easy, sometimes very hard. Some were very forthcoming. Others, there's no emails on their website. There's maybe just a form. Eventually you can find a phone number. And I'm sitting in London, England, remember, and pharmaceutical companies are based all around the world. There's lots in Europe, lots in the US, East Coast, West Coast. And there's a couple in Japan. And I remember I had to get into the office, I think it's 7 a.m. to call them for 4 p.m. their time.
Oh, wow.
And then there's this language barrier when the receptionist picks up the phone.
Right.
So those ones were a little less successful with the language barrier. I think we managed to get some good data on some of them. Others, we tried our best, and that was sort of the goal.
Right.
We were really actually impressed that about half of the companies we reached out to got back to us. When you sort of find other studies like this where people reach out to do these sort of audits, you don't get a large response rate. If you do a survey of telemarket or polling companies, when they do surveys, they're getting response rates of 2 or 3%.
Okay.
I think we were being a bit more persistent, and All Trials and Sense About Science had built up a reputation as being, honest brokers about this and serious about transparency. And also, if things went wrong, we'd create a stink. So they wanted to work with us, and that was really great because, as you can read in the paper, it's in the BMJ, but it's an open access paper, so everyone can go there and read it, and it's readable, right? It's not super scientific-y jargon, I think, but maybe I was immersed in this too much. But yeah, so, the top-line results are actually pretty promising. So in the end, we looked at 42 different pharmaceutical companies, and that was another weird sort of thing. We started with sort of 50, but then some don't actually make drugs or have stopped making drugs. A couple got bought out, numerous ones in the 2 to 3 years it took us to go from collecting that data to publishing.
Oh, wow.
It just happens that fast. And so we got down to 42. So of the sort of top 25, 23 of them, 21 had committed, 91% of those top companies were committed to registering all their trials, and 96% were committed to sharing all results, which is fantastic. But there's sort of devil in the details. There's sort of fine print, caveats everywhere.
We'll share all our details under this kind of requirement or under these conditions?
Under these conditions, definitely. So one of the big things in this paper is sort of the difficulty with the language, because some companies would talk about, well, we'll follow local laws, but laws on trial disclosure vary greatly around the globe. Like the US and Europe have some pretty good laws. They're not being enforced. But then developing countries where a lot of drugs are now being tested aren't as strict, for example. So saying we just conform to the law is not really being more transparent, being more ethical. Then you have other things like maybe they'll exclude phase 4 trials, which are the trials you do sort of after the drug is on the market, just to sort of do follow-ups and make sure it's still working. Sometimes they just don't release those. Other times they'll only release the trials if the drug makes it to market. But it can be really nice to know that a drug didn't go to market and why, because then other companies aren't wasting time and money and people's lives. Because when we're doing clinical trials, you have to remember people are putting their lives at risk to some extent. They're taking on this burden. But yeah, stop me if there's any questions that raises. That's sort of a very quick and brief overview of everything. But
Thank you for explaining that so well.
What do you think, Crew?
I had some questions. I read the paper. I thought it was pretty accessible. First, I mean, you published in BMJ. It's a pretty well-known journal. It's pretty high impact factor there. What response have you gotten? What impact you think this paper is having and is going to have?
I think it was pretty well received. I know BMJ was one of the co-founders of the All Trials campaign, so they've always been a very supportive. That's not to say they, eased the paper in. They definitely held it to the same academic rigor. The actual publishing part was more on Ben Goldaker's part, and since I'm not at Sense About Science anymore, I can't really speak to how well it's gone over since. I know they're pretty good at getting press in Britain, but I don't think it's gotten the international press that's probably worth doing, because this paper covers companies around the globe, including one here in Canada that we should talk about in a minute. But there are sort of two responses already on the BMJ website, sort of peer-reviewed comments almost. They have a really nice comment section, and they're both very positive. They're from, who did I see? They're from academics who work in the similar fields, like someone who works at the International Society for Medical Publication Professionals and a researcher from Johns Hopkins University who's done a lot of work on transparency, and they're overwhelmingly in support of this. They say this is great. Of course, it's just sort of a first step, because this just looks at pharmaceutical companies, and there's a lot of research also done by academics, by universities, by charities. And
I was
going to
ask about that. Like, were you planning on following up with different labs, different universities, different therapies? Like, not everything is a drug. Not all therapies in medicine is a drug. Some are surgeries, some are other types of treatments. So, like, I work in radiation therapy, for example, right? So
absolutely. Yeah, the All Trials campaign doesn't try to distinguish clinical trials on drugs from other clinical trials, because when people are putting their health on the line, regardless of the intervention, we should be making sure those are captured.
Yeah, absolutely.
Medical devices are a huge field, especially in terms of the non-pharmaceutical, non-corporate trials. It's sort of the next step of this kind of audit. So one thing there's always been pushback about all trials is they say, well, this is just a corporate problem. This is just evil pharma trying to hide their results. But every study that has looked at academics find they're equally culpable, and sometimes even a little bit more now, because some of the big pharma companies have gotten so much egg on their face for scandals and terrible stuff. Everyone sort of remembers all the big drug scandals around even some of the statin stuff recently and others. So they're trying to be more transparent. They're trying to proactively. I think that's one of the reasons Pfizer does so well on this, because they've had so many bad years that they're like, well, let's be proactive finally. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely a desire to move, especially I think that's Ben's next plan, to start looking at academics and universities. And of course, that's a monumental task, because you have dozens of universities across the UK alone, let alone all of those in the US, Canada, and around the world.
Well, the other direction you could go in terms of follow-up is it's one thing to have a policy. it's another thing to follow that policy, right? So and I don't even know how you'd follow up with that. Like, how do you know about the studies that, like, they're supposed to be publishing all their studies within whatever 12 months of results coming in? Great. Except that, how do you know that they haven't done this? You know, like, if this, I don't know, anybody who's worked in any workplace knows that not you don't always follow all your policies.
Right.
So,
they have a policy, but then they just don't do it. And
that happens all the time.
Well, that's one thing that's sort of pointed out at the end in the limitations and so forth is, obviously, some companies actually showed us evidence they were going beyond their policies because their policies were actually kind of mediocre. And they were like, well, we're actually doing all this other stuff. And we're like, well, why don't you write that down then and brag about it?
Yeah.
But
or make it your
companies,
policy if you're already doing it.
I think the study here at hand references one or two attempts to look at that. It's a really big data problem because companies put out so much information. And one of the challenges with, auditing success rates of clinical trial publication is we don't always know how many trials are being undertaken. So that's where the registration becomes really important. Obviously, they, at this point, have to tell regulators that they're going to undertake experiments on human beings. But like in Canada, that we don't have any regulations requiring that information be made public. We had sort of a start towards that with Vanessa's law that I think came out in about 2014. But then there were no regulations enacted to enforce that. And we're still sort of waiting on the Liberals to do something with it. And so trying to figure out how many are all published is difficult. But it's definitely something that needs to be done.
I was really fascinated by the focus on the individual patient data. Like, that seems to be really where, like, you could get a lot of useful science out of that. Because, I mean, being as a person who's engaged in research myself, I know how much devil is in the details, I guess, and what comes out of that analysis may be different based on who does that. So it would be very interesting, especially if we could have some sort of standardized format for, you could just easily mine this information. Yeah, you could make these meta-analyses. You could see, do I come to the same conclusions as these authors did with this same data? Like, that would, I mean, that's science. That's how science is supposed to be done. And so that would be great if we could get that kind of engagement.
Absolutely. And it goes even beyond that, because when I was at Sense About Science, one of the sort of side projects I did while writing content for the All Trials campaign was looking at sort of novel uses for individual patient data. And we found, this was a little while ago, so I don't remember the specific examples. I remember writing 5 or 6 different stories about studies where they took that, basically raw data like you're talking about, but then didn't just reanalyze it to see if the drug worked, but actually looked at if the drug could work in other conditions and combined it with other studies so that they could have bigger data pools to look at different indications and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So that does create, that definitely opens up a lot of doors for new avenues of research. But I think it can be a sort of distraction, especially for academics who just start thinking just like you're thinking, which is good. We don't want scientists thinking like that. But we also want to make sure that the main emphasis is on just sort of the summary results that would be on something like clinicaltrials.gov, because the fact is, if we don't know all the basic results, let alone going into the deeper data, then we can't really compare and contrast. And the other problem is a lot of this individual patient data, because it can be highly sensitive, is often put behind certain barriers, which are generally reasonable so that it's used for legitimate academic purposes. Like, often researchers will have to submit a proposal to a company and then sometimes even have to use it behind a sort of portal, like they log into a website to use it, which can be frustrating, I imagine, but there's ways they're trying to protect the data, I guess. The raw or just the summary results, that kind of information alone, if we'd had all of that out on, say, statins, they may not have overprescribed as many, or on opiates, we might have known well in advance the addictive properties of them.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
One of our listeners, actually, Will, who we had on earlier today.
Never heard of him.
He was curious if you have like a kind of a theory as to why academics aren't already doing this kind of thing. where now you've got the pharmaceutical companies doing it, but you still got to work on academics doing it. So
I should say there are lots of universities and public and funders, especially, who are starting to be more proactive. I think the National Institutes of Health in the U.S. has really started to move towards if you want to get more money from us, you have to show that you're being proactively transparent.
Okay.
But that said, the sort of incentives for not publishing in the corporate world and the academic world are obviously different. In the corporate world, there's financial, like we don't want to make our product look bad. But in the academic world, it's the same sort of publish or perish problem.
Right.
So people only want to really publish novel results, or historically have wanted to focus on, oh, this is exciting. If it's, a marginally better than placebo, or, no better than
Right.
placebo, maybe that study's not your priority when you have two others on the go that are a little bit more promising for high impact journals.
Yeah.
Now, there are solutions sort of coming down the pipes for those, and there are an increasing number of journals that will accept, null results. There are journals dedicated to null results in clinical trials, and ones like, I think BMJ, but a couple other journals out there that slipped my mind are being, PLOS ONE is being far more open to accepting all results regardless of, as long as the science is good, rather than is it the most exciting science. And that's a good step. The other thing that...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the other thing that's important is websites like clinicaltrials.gov, which is the U.S.'s clinical trials repository, essentially, where they post summary results and registrations. You don't have to write up a full paper. You can just basically put down your results in a tabular form, like a little table, an Excel spreadsheet, upload that, and then you're done.
Yeah.
And that's law now in the States to actually have to put it up there. But the compliance just hasn't been around because the government has no motivation to go after people, especially academics.
I mean, if you made it contingent on getting the next grant and getting the next thing, I mean, that would really be like, I think that would be very motivational. I did my PhD in astronomy, and if you didn't publish your data from the last time you got, results from that telescope, they sure as hell didn't give you more time on that telescope, right? Like, that's not.
Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, they didn't. So, yeah, that was. I mean, you got to think about it. It's an economy like any other. Academia is a very specialized economy, and there's got to be incentives and to get people to do what you need to do, right? Like, that's how it works.
I think we kind of touched on that in previous episodes where we talked about the lack of replication studies for things.
But things like this individualized patient data would be very useful for that kind of thing.
Right,
How do you can replicate? Can I mean, really, you get into the meat of it. Depending on how you bin the data, depending on some of it might be dependent on how the study is designed, and there may be selection biases in there that the people who made the study didn't realize. Or there's so many different ways that these things could go awry. That it's so interesting to think to be able to have access to the actual data is really fascinating. So have you guys presented this at a conference? Have you done a press release?
I imagine they did. Like I said, I'm not at Sense About Science right now, so I know what we would do when we had something like this coming out is there would be a strong press push. We'd probably have had, a couple journalists on the phone like a few days before with the sort of advanced copy who we knew would do a fantastic job, because one of my other projects at Sense About Science was media monitoring. And so you got to see all the worst science reporting in the country, and we actively tried to call them out on it.
Oh, there's some pretty shitty. It's bad.
And it was hit and miss. Sometimes it worked.
Sometimes even a good press release can get twisted weird if it's.
I don't think any of them have really bad intentions, but there's so many times reporters would come in, interview someone, and you'd think it was all fine, and then you'd read the article they wrote, and you'd be like, "This is not what we did. This is not. No. Oh God, they didn't quite get okay." Like it's hard. It's really hard to disseminate this information to the public, to lay people can understand. Like,
absolutely, and one thing we absolutely tried to do always at Sense About Science in the All Trials campaign is distill these often complicated ideas into not just understandable text, but motivating and captivating so that you get the importance of these issues, because it's not just a sort of academic issue about, oh, they didn't publish, whatever. They're not sort of following oh, pharmaceutical companies, why would they be transparent? Why should they be transparent?
Yeah.
They need to protect their, intellectual property.
I mean,
But so
arguably,
there-
if you don't publish your null results, if you don't publish your bad results, or you don't publish everything that you have, basically, you're not doing science. That's not science, right? If you're not,
Right.
like, that is the scientific method to,
Yeah, you got to have all of the
yeah,
data,
like,
right?
Yeah.
that's how it works. Like,
Yeah.
not just what's sexy and what's gonna sell more Viagra. Like, it doesn't, like,
Right.
Another strong
Yeah.
component of that is you want it to be relatable. You want it to be relevant to lay people. You want to help explain to the people that have no clue about this stuff. Okay, well, how does that apply to me? How does that apply to my life? And I think that's important.
Well, I mean, most
aspect of it.
people will get some medical intervention sometime in their life, and they may be approached, will you join this trial? And you got to go do these extra interviews and go do these extra tests, and possibly it's more risky, and possibly, blah, blah, blah. And, it's be pretty shitty to then find out later that, your results from that thing you participated in are sitting in somebody's drawer somewhere, never published. Nobody ever knew anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the core parts of the All Trials campaign from the very beginning has been patient groups and individual patients. Like our strongest voices, the most powerful and most moving voices are individuals who've taken part in clinical trials or who are waiting on newer medicines. And some of them, we've actually talked to people who were in trials and went, where did my results go? Because if you get involved at that level, no matter your background, you're kind of interested in, what did they find out?
Absolutely, yeah.
You want to know.
Yeah.
And so at the very least, they should get to know. And then by extrapolation, everyone should, get to know. We don't need to know the full chemical formula and how they manufactured it. But
Right.
does this save lives?
Yeah.
Is kind of the core question.
Well, this is fascinating stuff, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about it.
Yeah. Can I talk about our one Canadian pharma company that we audited?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
So there's not a lot of pharmaceutical companies based in Canada. The one we came across was called Valiant, that's based in Quebec. And I went through their website as much as I could and couldn't really find anything about transparency or trying to be public about what they do. So, I send them emails when I eventually find an email. I think it was extra tough for them. And finally I called them, and I called them from Ottawa or called them from London and get someone on the phone who eventually tells me, oh, they don't answer surveys. I was like, no, we're doing a audit and study, and we're trying to find out what your transparency policy is. And they just kind of got dodgy and like hung up on me eventually. I went, all right.
Really?
I think I tried that twice, and then they were angry at me and stopped taking my calls. So,
Interesting.
yeah, Canada's one pharma company didn't do well on our scoring system. They got a whopping 0 out of 2,000.
Wow.
Wow.
I mean, the top score went to GlaxoSmithKline, who got just over 1,000. So even they have a lot of room for improvement.
Right.
There were a number of companies that got in that same sort of range, which was really great to see, especially some of the big ones like Pfizer and Novo Nordisk and Novartis. But there were also some like neat little companies like Leo Pharma that we always liked. They're based in, I think, Denmark, and they do some like cosmetic formulas. But they, on their website, talk about how they publish results going back to 1990, when a lot of other companies only go back to 2005 or later.
Right.
And one of the things you realize about medicines is it takes a long time to go from sort of conception to marketplace.
Absolutely.
So the clinical trials on the drugs you're taking right now, if any of you are on a prescription, were probably trials done 10, 15 years ago, maybe more.
Yeah.
And that's the data we need. That's why the campaign focuses a lot of energy on that past data.
Right.
And a lot of companies and a lot of regulators are like, well, we'll move on. We'll do better in the future. It's like, well, yes, do better in the future, but don't forget about all that stuff in the past.
We still need that stuff from the past.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it might allow you to do more long-term, have a longer-term perspective, I guess, on a lot of these drugs.
For sure.
Yeah. And if we open up more of that past data, we can do more of that sort of different kind of science and new science on old data. And it'll be cheaper. Hard work's already done.
Sorry, just to quickly in astronomy, that was a push that happened a long time now to make a lot of astronomical data public. So a telescope will take data, and whoever asked for that data will have a year or whatever, 2 years to analyze it. But then it just goes public, and you can download a lot of scientific data from the telescopes. And there are astronomers who make a living just doing that, just mining the millions of terabytes of data.
And there's also people that like to take pictures of what the sky was on a certain date and then sell you a poster of what the sky looked like when you were born.
My
Just
fiance is trying to get me on that right now. Yeah? She's like, oh, yeah,
so
we met
cute.
this day. I'm like,
Oh, listen, the stars.
Do they have the cloud cover and everything?
No, just the naked stars.
Just say, can't you just generate that on a computer now?
Pretty much.
Man, you could sell me a pile of crap and I would believe it.
I don't think it changes on human timescales. I don't really think you would know. Anyways, whatever.
Right.
No. Sorry, but
Yeah, that's about it. The night sky on the day that you were born is the same as the night sky on the day that I was born.
roughly. I mean, unless you were born like 2,000 years ago, yeah.
Yes. Well, I think, I think that's all the time we have. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your talk here?
Sure. I'll just mention that it only makes sense that a paper focused on calling for pharmaceutical companies to be far more transparent would in itself be transparent. So if you want to look at how all the different companies did and see the breakdowns of the data, you can go to policyaudit.alltrials.net, and it's a beautiful, awesome website that I had no hand in. But you can go and click on every company, see what their policies are. You can see what the scoring method is. If you think that's wrong, then you could, come up with your own and remix it and bias it towards your favorite company, I guess. But, it's important for a company or an
My
issue
favorite
like this
pharmaceutical
to
company.
be, we all have trading cards, don't we? So,
Yes.
And of course, the only other thing to do is for everyone to go to alltrials.net and sign the petition there if you haven't. This is always important because it always needs more signatures and more public pressure to convince policymakers, pharmaceutical companies, organizations, really everyone that, this is an important issue for skeptics, humans, everyone.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, where can we find more stuff that you do?
I am everywhere. Luckily, as far as I can tell, I'm the only Ian Bushfield in the world. So when you Google me, that is stuff I've done. So I'm on Twitter at iBushfield. I work for the BC Humanist Association here in Vancouver now, so that's at bchumanist.ca, and we're always accepting donations. All Trials is also accepting donations. I'm on the board of the BC Civil Liberties Association. They're doing some great work standing up for protesters' rights and countering hate speech or countering white supremacy right now. They're standing up for some of the people who are organizing a counter-protest in Vancouver tomorrow. What else have I done? I don't know. Oh, yeah, I run a BC politics podcast called Politicoast, which you can find at politicoast.ca.
Yeah, that's kind of creative, Politicoast.
Took us a while.
You picked a good one.
It took us 10 seconds to figure out our name.
10 seconds.
Yeah, good enough.
That's fine.
Whatever, just put something on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I think we're going to take a break.
Yeah, we'll take an ad break, eh?
Yep.
Cool.
Thanks again, Ian.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
If you like what we're doing and want to help us keep the lights on, go become a patron at patreon.com/brainstorm podcast. You can hear the bonus half hour that we record every episode and get a shout out when you support the show. Become a patron for just $1 an episode at patreon.com/brainstorm podcast. Or you can support the show by ordering a t-shirt, mug or other gear from our store at caffeepress.ca/brainstorm podcast gear. If you can't afford to become a patron or buy gear, then why not give us a rating or write a review on iTunes or Stitcher? Every rating makes it easier for people to find us. Thanks for your support.
We are given one life, full of billions of small and large decisions. To be somebody, to change, to be kind, to give hope, to become a better person, and to leave a lasting impact on this planet. It is a decision to be made every single day while your heart is still beating. We've made our decision. Absence of Clothing, atheist and science-based apparel and merchandise, donating 50% of our profits to charity. Look good and feel good, without God. Check us out at absenceofclothing.com and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest for discount codes and other sweet swag.
Use the code BRAINSTORM at absenceofclothing.com and get 10% off.
Hello, Elon Dubrovsky here, local podcaster and science enthusiast. Are your podcasts spewing too much bunk all the time? Are your podcasts constantly making things up, driving you crazy? Are your podcasts full of shit? Think there's no answer? You're so stupid! There is! The Reality Check. Finally, there is a fun, skeptical Canadian podcast.
The San Francisco Hospital study on
paper
origami. Come on, guys, let me just...
Can you make a reel of Elon's paper shuffling?
Yeah.
Make it like...
That sounds amazing! Is your music player a computer, a phone, or an in-between? That doesn't matter, because we work on all platforms. The Reality Check. You'll be checked. So head on down to trcpodcast.com. That's the home of the Reality Check. Subscribe.
Sweet. Super sweet, you guys. All right, now we need to do some Woo Report stuff.
I'm not a scientist, but if I can tell you your science sucks, then your science really sucks.
That just makes no fucking sense. I mean, it's just bullshit. Fuck.
Best. It's gonna take this one here.
You guys definitely know how to pick articles to talk about.
Yeah.
So, ladies, just got a question for you here. How would you feel, if you were getting intimate with your man one night and he pulls out some tape, says he wants to try something new?
Wants to try something new.
Yeah,
right?
I'm sure there'll be a few questions, but it's this new product called Jif Tip, the Dick Tip. So essentially...
It sounds catchy. Tell us more.
Ooh, don't mind if I do. Essentially, it's a new way of birth control.
Oh.
So instead of using condoms, you just go and put tape on top of your penis, on your man's penis. And they even give out a really nice illustration here in the article where, oh my God, this penis is huge. Like, seriously. It's
Not to scale.
How much tape does this take?
Yeah.
Not to scale.
Yeah, wow. This inconsistencies, let's just say that. So essentially, you put the tape over the hole, and it's supposed to be a contraceptive. How would you...
Just over the hole?
Just over the hole.
Okay.
Or the guy's hole, too. Just so we're clear.
Okay,
and,
that's good. We gotta.
By hole, he means urethral opening, people. Okay, just so it's not his
For the
butthole.
medical nerds out there, we
not-
need to clarify.
It's not his mouth.
I just want to clarify, I was trying to do
You should
layman's
probably
terms.
tape his mouth shut.
Yeah, too. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Shut up.
So
Shut
just
up.
get the job done. Don't talk.
You had me at dick tip.
So how do you ladies so far feel about the dick tip?
Or men. I mean, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like it would be very effective.
I feel like
Can you name the clinical trials that found that it was effective?
Well, considering there's in the article, it's not FDA approved.
Yes. There's the terms and conditions stating it's not supposed to work and it can't prevent STIs.
Or pregnancy.
Or pregnancy. Yeah, let's clearly add that.
But it
one.
may leave some tape inside your vagina. I mean, I don't know how well securely attached.
Depending on if you pull out,
putting it.
or just ejaculate inside.
This is a stupid article.
Is there
Should we
like
just move
lots
on?
of
It just
pressure?
Like impractical. It's
Just like the vagina lipstick.
It definitely won't work.
It definitely just don't even bother you guys.
They do mention the vagina lipstick.
Yes.
Oh, do they?
That.
Yeah.
What is that?
They came out with
pill?
came out with the vagina lipstick, and then they came out with the panty liner that has the powder that becomes the vagina lipstick.
Right.
That essentially, when you have your period, it glues your labia together.
I remember this shit. Sorry,
So
we
that-
can move on. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
It was good
I'm
times.
skeptical. I don't think this shit's gonna work. Isn't it gonna hurt when you pull it off?
I can tell you, I'm not really into.
Has
putting
anyone
tape on my
actually
dick.
taped their dick? Can anyone tell us?
let us know, guys.
You
and
have
I
not.
will not.
Okay.
There's just some
Anyone
things
else?
I'm not.
Even for science?
Not even for science.
Tape your
Even
dick
we
for
promised
science,
to publish
Corey.
the clinical trial results, which I assume will be null, which will be you got a bunch of people pregnant, or one person, whatever.
Maybe
Well,
that was Usher's
Actually,
problem.
it wouldn't be a good. I wouldn't be a good test subject.
Okay.
So the site actually, one of the creators got quite defensive about it. It's like, don't. Essentially, he wrote a huge essay on just saying, "Don't knock it till you try it." I was like,
Don't knock it till you get somebody pregnant that you didn't need to get pregnant. Like, no, that's
"Don't knock it
stupid.
till you knock it up."
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the other thing they quickly mentioned in here is, they talked to our urologist, I think, about just with, back pressure. Let's
Yeah.
just put it that way.
Well,
We'll just call it back pressure.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. That was.
Yeah.
You either no.
Basic sex ed, guys. Basic sex.
Basic sex ed.
I don't know.
Get a condom.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Just fuck.
There's a
Okay.
reason there's a reservoir tip on those.
There's
No doubt.
I am interested in hearing about male birth control pills. I've been apparently it's gaining a little bit of popularity now. There's not enough science to actually go ahead and market it because they're still being tested here.
Right.
But it'd be a really interesting outlook because I do feel like
Didn't
women
they
have
try
a lot.
that and then they found on the test subjects that they hated the side effects?
There was a
Yes.
lot of side effects.
Yeah, they
Yes.
got
They were that were essentially like PMS,
yeah.
traditional PMS.
Yeah, they bloated. They got cranky.
Guess what? There's side effects to the female birth control
Yeah, I
pill,
was gonna
too.
say.
Just FYI.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, there was. I mean,
Just saying.
there's some people like they can't say that it was caused by the drug, but some people dropped out of the trial because of potentially like suicidal thoughts and depression
Jeez.
and
Whoa,
stuff.
wow.
Like,
Pretty serious.
so like they can't say that it was the drug, but they can't definitely say it was the drug. So
Yeah.
It's pretty serious.
so
marriage.
the trial was discontinued, I think, at the time.
Jesus. Very serious.
That's messed up.
I think we can all agree this article kind of hits.
It hits below the belt.
Yeah.
You're welcome, everyone. You're welcome. We don't need gum
Nailed
here.
it.
Yeah, we don't.
Fuck
He's
him.
not funny anyway.
Ass face.
Car salespeople, I'm telling you.
So, Renee, do you want to talk about your story? Are you prepared to?
Not really. I'll just sum it up this way: is apparently there was a Google memo, a 10-page Google memo. I'll admit, I started reading it and my brain just flatlined.
Yeah?
It's essentially 10 pages of bad science.
Yeah. Well, I kind of read it as, let's see, kind of sexist.
Yep.
Kind of,
Oh, that one.
Yeah. Women shouldn't work in tech because their brains are geared towards caring and intuition stuff and not math
Who
and
said
tech
that?
stuff.
Was it like a man? I'm just curious.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
it
a
was
man.
an engineering, one of the engineers.
Yeah,
that-
it's like, kind of sexist engineer in Silicon Valley. And water is wet.
yeah.
That's a really good summation.
I mean, it's like there's been how many different things come out that Silicon Valley is it's a boys' club. Surprise,
Yeah.
shocker.
They talked to the guy that wrote the memo, I believe, on As It Happens last night on CBC, and I listened to CBC Radio 1 a lot, and he was really defensive. They were kind of holding his feet to the fire.
Well,
about
I think from
a lot of his
he got
facts.
fired.
He got fired.
Yeah, he got fired.
Well, from my understanding, is he tried to couch it in very nice-ish terms. You know, he's tried to be...
He tried to be as fluffy with it as he could,
Yeah.
right? But it was still sexist nonsense.
Yeah.
Such bullshit.
When you guys say Silicon Valley, you guys are talking about that TV show, right? Or, I have no idea. What
No,
you're
I'm talking
the
the
tech industry in California.
Okay.
industry in California.
Like, yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah,
what
the TV show was named after that.
Oh,
so.
okay. I was gonna say before that is Game of Thrones.
That's
We're not
true.
talking about that.
No, we're
Yeah, he got
respecting
fired,
this.
and a lot of people were really outraged at it. Like a lot of quote unquote skeptics were outraged at it as a free speech issue, right?
But sorry, he did this at work.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Well,
At his,
he's free to do it. He didn't get thrown in jail, but his employer's also free to fire him for not following company policy.
Well,
He
it's
did,
like,
yeah.
I mean, this one article, like, dear leftist, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's the backlash. Anytime,
Yeah.
you know, it's bound to happen.
You know, I love how they treat freedom of speech like it's a leftist thing.
Yeah.
It's just basic human rights. Didn't I have this discussion with you, Corey? It's like, is it still, what's really freedom of speech? Do we have freedom of speech, right? And it's like, oh, you have freedom to do whatever you want. Nobody's stopping you, but there's consequences to your actions.
Not consequence, not
that's
consequence
right.
free.
Yeah.
yeah, there's freedom of speech, and then there's consequence-free speech.
Yeah. No, you're free to say it, and your employer's free to fire you.
That's their freedom.
You're free to be an asshole. Just get ready to be being called an asshole.
Get ready to be president.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah, the new consequence of being an asshole is reward, apparently.
Depends how unblinkingly you're an asshole. I think.
That's right.
You
You
really
just
gotta
gotta
have
not
I've seen
back down.
a comedian did it. I can't remember whether it was John Oliver who it was, did that thing about the difference between Trump and Richard Nixon. Nixon was an asshole in the closet. Trump is out and proud.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, when Trudeau came out with that Rolling Stone thing, like a few newspaper companies, Maclean, CBC, came out saying, why do we keep comparing Trudeau to Trump and stuff like that? And, you know, in many ways they are right, but it's a Rolling
pretty low
Stone.
bar.
Yeah, it's a Rolling Stones article. They're not,
Yeah.
they're not really meant to talk about deep political issues.
But the weird thing is, Rolling Stone has in its
I
history. They've actually done good articles, but
Yeah.
they've also done
Total garbage.
They've also done like pictorials of fucking Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's some good stuff and a lot of fluff.
Yeah, totally.
I'm just calling it right now. Andrew Scheer's the next Trump. Sorry, guys.
He's so boring, though.
He's so
Trump's an idiot,
bored.
but at least he can. He can appeal to the lowest common denominator.
He's not engaging enough to be Trump. At least Trump's entertaining.
I can't remember. Was it McLean's or Weiss that sat down and had a beer with him, and how he tried defending how being pro-abortion. Oh, sorry, not pro-abortion. Pro-life.
Yeah.
Is a feminist choice. I'm like, no. I think that sounds kind of like...
I'm so sick and tired of fucking white dudes deciding what's happening to my body. I'm sorry.
We prefer brown dudes to do it instead. I'm
Well,
just kidding.
No, it all depends. As long as I get to choose what happens to my fucking body, that's fine.
That's
It doesn't-
feminism right there for you. That's quite a
that's
simple
right.
term. You don't tell women or men what to do with their bodies. It's a fairly simple concept. Now, when you go out and say that you're pro-life, you constrict women from that choice. That itself is a violation of their rights to do what they want with their body. So no, if you're pro-life, you are not, by definition, a feminist.
And
Sorry,
it's not,
Andrew
it's
Scheer.
not. I think pro-life is a misnomer. It's pro-birth. It has nothing to do with life.
Anti-choice.
Anti-choice.
Thank you. I guess that's a
pro-birth.
better way to put it.
I mean, and that's become distilled for me in the recent past, just because there's people just
Yeah.
are so insistent that that you don't have an abortion, and
But then But then once it's born, fuck yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can be on welfare. You can, but you're just fucking having kids just so you can get more money.
Be
Well,
more
fuck.
responsible.
I wish it was
Let me
that
get an
simple.
abortion. So, yeah, like, I just don't. It incenses
There
me.
is a really weird.
George Carlin sums it up best. If you're preborn, you're fine. If you're preschool, you're fucked.
Yeah. I don't know. The pro-life movement in Saskatchewan is strangely strong.
It
The
is,
force is
isn't it?
strong with those ones here.
Well,
Like, I
you
don't
go
know,
on a
it's
road
weird.
trip and you see
Yeah,
more than a
Exactly.
handful of pro-life signs.
Our
Like,
buses.
It just makes it enrages me.
Yes. It bugs the shit out of me.
So, yeah, fuck you, Silicon Valley.
Yes.
Went from Silicon Valley to pro-life.
And fuck you, dick tip. From the front end and the back end.
Yeah.
We're the worst programmers. We just giggle like Beavis and Butthead the whole time. Like, you work on front end?
Back end.
He said
We still love you, Will.
Oh, yeah, right. Don't stop giving us money. I mean,
We need more patrons. Is that how we get more patrons?
we make fun of what they do.
end.
Yes, absolutely. That's
Talking
how we get more
about
patrons.
Back
That's
end.
exactly how you find yourself to be more endearing.
Yep.
All right.
We mock you.
We'll keep doing that. We'll keep doing that. Should I-
All right. Are
should
we
I
done?
do some listener feedback?
Sure. Let's do that.
We have some this week.
You can't
We do
finish
some.
on time. That's wrong.
The ladies
would
are
be
fucking
weird,
running the
but-
ship. Shit's gonna happen.
Corey, you're fired.
Oh! Rachel emailed us and said, "Hi
Damn it, I
guys,
already paid him.
I've been catching up on your podcast." Oh shit! So Rachel's emailed us and she listened to the July 17th podcast yesterday episode, which happens to be the episode with the vibrator joke. I'll never forget it. I was mowing the lawn at the time. Thank you for making such an odious chore absolutely hilarious. That was fun. Listener / guest / patron / honorary crew member Will emailed and said, "I'm listening to the last episode. Fuck everybody right now. I just got to the end of your segment about whack jobs killing trans folks. I have never understood why people get so angry over genitals. To me, it has always been simple. You look at someone and find them hot or you don't. You talk to someone and are attracted to them or you're not. If you put your dick in something and you enjoyed it, you had good sex, whether it was a man, woman, or gym sock, shouldn't fucking matter. Yes, warn me before sex, but only if you haven't had bottom surgery. In my experience, big surprises tend to mess up the mood. For me, I don't want to know you're trans until at least the 5th date. Come on, that's like saying I have kids or come meet my folks. You want to make sure I'm going to stay around a while, and so do I. Telling someone too soon screams moving too fast. I guess my point is all these folks that have violent thoughts about this victimized minority of, from what I've seen, a primarily attractive people need to remember who Jesus got mad at and who he didn't. They should ask themselves if they really have the right of things. Sounds good. Randy Todd Lamonda posted on the Facebook page saying the fuck everybody episode kills. And Jonathan Areola, hope I said that right, from the TDTF Areola. TDTF.
You got areolas on the brain, baby.
Yeah. They're like on my breasts, but Anyways,
Mine too.
And my lips.
Technically on the brain.
Yeah.
That would be weird.
That would be super weird. Oh. But Areola says on Twitter, he said, vagina, I can see the confusion. There's no new patrons on Patreon at this time. Remember that being a patron gets you tons of access to extra content that nobody else gets. Come on, everybody. Including exclusive content every month for $5 and up patrons. Our Patreon page is www.patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. No new iTunes reviews. Hopefully we didn't alienate 2 people with the Fuck Everybody episode. I think it was good. I don't know. We got some positive reviews.
We did get some positive feedback.
Yeah. No
People
new-
like it when you say fuck everybody. Eh?
I think everybody has an inherent need to vent.
Yeah.
So remember, if you get us a rating and a review, it really helps the show out. Yeah, let us know what you think, and we will read your review on air. You can do that when you share the episodes and tell your friends to listen. Does anyone want to plug their stuff?
I have my podcast, my other podcast.
Yes.
I haven't put an episode out in a while, But yeah,
Now that you're back from holidays,
I should be able to get back on track.
What's it called again, Corey?
The Hardcore Skeptic Examines. And until this series of interviews is done, it's The Hardcore Skeptic Examines Social Justice.
Nice.
Very nice. All right, we can cue the outro music.
Are you sure?
Yep. Let's do this.
What if I want to plug something?
Oh! Plug something.
Plug away,
I just
Dave.
want to say if you're in the Regina area or Saskatoon area, I'll be playing with a pop artist named Xana. Thursday the 24th, I'll be at Flint in Saskatoon. It's a club.
Nice.
And then I'll be here at the Owl on the 25th, hitting the keys and pushing the buttons, all that stuff.
You were going places.
Very
Dave.
nice.
Yeah, and then U of R Welcome Week as well, but I'll plug that next time. So.
Oh, sweet.
Sounds good.
Can't wait.
So that's my thing.
That's a good
Yay,
plug.
Dave.
Now
What was the artist?
Her name's Xana. It's Xana.
Xana.
I was going to make a Xanax joke, but
Yeah, like if you just go to I believe it's just thisisxana.com, like Xana.
Cool.
Nice.
It's all right there. You can buy tickets online for the Owl show, and it's like dark pop. It's kind of a little gritty.
Nice.
Gritty.
Nice. You're doing the audio engineering?
I'm a live DJ performer.
Oh, wow.
Like
Jeez.
I'll be doing the stage
You're
work.
you're doing the DJ thing.
I am. Yeah, we're planning on touring in October actually, so we might
Nice.
we might end up in Vancouver and a few places like that.
Holy
so.
shit.
That's super cool.
So yeah,
Right on, man.
she's really good. She's really good and young and up and coming. So
That is awesome.
it's gonna be
Cool.
Thanks, Dave.
If no one has anything else to plug, let's cue the outro music.
Let's cue it.
Sounds nicer when you say it than when I say it. What the fuck?
Yeah, I'll listen to Angela anytime.
You can check out the show notes at www.thebrainstormpodcast.com and our website, www.brainstormblog.net. Thanks to our financial supporters, Will, Lisa, Rob, Aaron, Nathan, Daryl, Stephanie, Positively Skeptical, Michael, Lachlan, Magnus, and Alden. You can join us live every second week when we broadcast live on Spreaker. You can find us at It's hard to say all those W's.
I don't.
Spreaker.com
I really don't.
/user/brainstorm podcast. I should
Fuck the
stop.
W's.
Fuck the W's. Next time we are teaming up with the Packard Pokesad podcast
Yeah.
for a special episode. We look forward to that. Please tune in. Thanks, Will, Ian, and Bassett for joining us. Will and Bassett don't really have an online presence, but you can find his work, Ian's work at bchumanist.ca and politicoast.ca. We'll put a link in the show notes at the Brainstorm blog, brainstormpodcast.net. Let's try that. The notes are going to be on brainstormblog.net, and they're a work in progress. Thank you to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for the intro and for some of our ads. And thanks to Jason Como for our outro music. Corey's laughing at me because now he's not the only one. You can find his stuff over at aloststateofmind.com. All music is played either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. I think that's everything, so give us a rating and a thumbs up or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter. Share the show and spread the word.
You're drunk.
You're doing a great job.
So tired.
Angela.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and remember, the truth matters.
Anna's out there.
Is also out there. And it matters.
Note taken from the astrophysicist.
Trademark.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel. Any guests or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Corey, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.
We just wanted to say thanks to everyone who listens to us, shares the show, gives us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or supports us through Patreon and Gumroad. We don't have a lot of interaction sometimes with our listeners, but what we have had proves that we attract some of the best people around. Smart, kind, and cool. An audience truly worthy of the titles hardcore and woo-free. Thanks for helping us make the world a smarter place.
I think we're back. We're back.
right.
Did you guys love that musical
God.
break? Wasn't it amazing, Corey?
I'm glad I'm back to picking the music next time.
Oh, come on.
I mean, nothing
It's
but
not that bad.
Slayer.
All right. So